A very good morning. Thanks for tuning into Republic TV. I'm Nivedna Prabhu. First up, the top story for this hour. The protesters who were seen openly raising slogans like Sar Tan Se Juda and turning the protest into a violent protest. 90 violent protesters were released by the intervention of AIMI chief Assaduddin Owaisi. From the last 2 days, there are massive protests which has taken place, and many places effigies are being burned, stones are being pelted, and slogans are being raised for which these protesters were detained by the South Zone Police. Now, this is the latest information that we're getting about this. 90 violent protesters have now been released after Owaisi's intervention. The protesters were detained by the police in Hyderabad by the South Zone Police. The police action after stones were pelted. For more information on this, we're joined in by Priyanka from Hyderabad. Priyanka, what is the latest that we're understanding? Now we have seen after the massive protest, which also did turn violent, that 90 protesters have been released by the police. But this time around, considering the fact that Owaisi had to intervene.
Well, yes, what we have seen on the ground here, at least where the police personnel and the RAF had been deployed, and they had been making sure that the protesters do not turn violent. So that was their only point of concern. But even yesterday, we have seen that during the flag march as well, the protesters had come. They were trying to rile up the people around them, which is why they had been detained. And yesterday itself, we were also learning that around 7 p.m. is when the bandh had been called for. And post that as well, we had seen that these protesters had come out on the streets and they had started to create a ruckus in and around the areas of Charminar. We are right now near to Charminar itself and another marketplace, in fact, that you see behind me. Yesterday as well, in fact, we had been saying that the marketplaces had been completely shut down. But towards the end of the day, we had seen that these shops had opened up. But then, of course, by the police, by the police, in fact, we had seen that the people, in fact, had been detained, whoever had been coming out on the streets and trying to protest. And we had seen those images all through the day yesterday itself. Now, today, what we are seeing is the silence before the calm, because the intelligence sources are telling us that today, perhaps not too many of the protesters are expected to come out, perhaps probably only in the night. But it is on Friday that there is a massive protest that has been called for, that there will be many people that will be gathering near the Charminar, and they will be protesting against Raja Singh's statements. And let's also talk about the kind of sloganeering these protesters had been doing. Now, day before yesterday in the midnight itself, we had seen those sloganeering of Sar Tan Se Juda, kind of sloganeerings that were being heard by these protesters. And also yesterday itself, when there were several of the protesters in the late last night as well, when they had come out on the streets, there were bike rallies that were being organized. So, of course, there is a lot of anger, at least in the undercurrent, that we are seeing, which is being witnessed by the police officials as well. And that is why they're saying that they will have to take all precautionary measures to make sure that these protests do not turn violent. Since the day before yesterday itself, we had seen that the stone pelting had been carried out and lathi charge had to be resorted to by the police to make sure that no untoward incident takes place in these protests that have been called for near Charminar. Now, in these particular areas itself, we are seeing that people have been demanding for justice against T. Raja Singh's statements, claiming that now they want to take a legal recourse. They want to approach the court so that there can be the strictest punishment that can be given to Raja Singh. That also they have been demanding for him to be hung till death. Now, these are the kind of statements, the slogans that we have seen from the protesters, and all of them really citing that these kind of insults against their religion, they cannot keep lying down. However, we did see that the political fraternity completely trying to rile up these protesters, including the Congress Hyderabad chief, who had also stated that he is in fact appealing to these protesters to find out Raja Singh, and wherever they see him, to beat him up as well. So these were the statements that we are seeing from the political fraternity. But of course, the protesters also seems to have been affected by it, because there is a lot of sporadic protests that had been going on. Today, we are being told through the day, perhaps not as many of the protests that might take place. But in the night, the intelligence sources are telling us perhaps in the night it might get a little more aggressive. aggressive by the protesters, and towards tomorrow is when there might be a probable law and order situation that might be created, is what the agencies are also telling us. But of course, on the ground, we do see that the anger is there in the protesters. We do see the political fraternity also reacting to Raja Singh's statements and them saying that Raja Singh needs to come out, and now completely it's high time that he comes out and apologizes.
Priyanka, in terms of the latest development being that Owaisi has also tweeted, and in that particular tweet, he has stated that this is a direct result of, Raja Singh's hate speech and he must be arrested at the earliest. What can we understand, from that? What is the further developments we have regarding that? If you can talk to us about that.
Well, that's right. In fact, we did follow the entire court proceedings that took place in the Nampally court, and of course, how Raja Singh had gotten bail is on a technicality is what we had also been tracking. Perhaps why we see that there is a lot more anger in the protesters. They're saying that they do have faith in the judiciary, they do have faith in the legal recourse, but it seems as though it has let them down, because on a technicality of the section 41A that he had been let go on bail just under a day when he had been arrested because of the comments that he had posted in the form of this 10-minute video that he had made making fun of the Prophet once again. And he had in fact also cited the Nupur Sharma matter as well. And we now see that the protesters have been claiming that they are very angry about the fact that Raja Singh has been let go on a technicality. Now they want this entire legal recourse to be taken, and of course we are also seeing that the lawyers of Raja Singh also getting several death threats as well. So that is also of course under the investigation. But as far as the latest developments are concerned, we do see that these are what we are tracking are the ramifications of Raja Singh's statements in the political fraternity, at least here in Hyderabad, where the AIMIM leaders in fact have been writing to the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, and they have been demanding an expulsion of Raja Singh, because they are saying that the kind of statements that Raja Singh had made are not just unbecoming but are in contravention to the oath that he took as a member of the Legislative Assembly. Now these are the statements that they have made in a letter that they have written to the Speaker itself. And also apart from that, we see on the other hand the Congress leaders coming out and trying to rile the protesters and stating that they want these protesters, these peoples, in fact they have been stating quote unquote all Muslims in fact should come out and beat up Raja Singh. They should find him wherever he is and then beat him up. These are the kind of statements, and of course the police has taken cognizance of that. They are making sure that these leaders do not make these kind of statements to these protesters, because on the ground we have been tracking the situation, and the police in fact has been trying to make sure that they counsel these protesters as well. Now there are outreach programs in the night that the police is also trying to carry out with these protesters to talk to them, to make them understand to not come out and make these violent protests in the entire city, especially in and around the area of Charminar. And that is why the police is stating that today perhaps they will be also carrying out more outreach programs. They will be speaking to the protesters. They will be telling them about their own legal rights, but also requesting them to do this peacefully and do not rile up other protesters as well, because we have seen this in the case of Nupur Sharma in Udaipur, and then of course Unmesh Kole in Amravati as well, how spur of the moment people who are emotional about it, they get carried away, and these kind of murders then take place as well. So the police is citing these incidents, and they're saying that they should be peaceful in their protest and that they can protest. It is their legal right, and if they want to approach the court, that is also within their legal right, but they should not be riling up the other people as well. Apart from that, we are seeing that at least tomorrow more RAF deployment that we are expecting will also take place rather than the one that has already happened. And today itself as well, there will be several flag marches that will be carried out by the RAF, by the police personnel, along with these outreach programs.
Priyanka, could you tell us as to in terms of the areas as well, are there specific areas where there will be more, security beefed up?
Well, as I mentioned, these protests are happening in certain areas, which is in and around the areas of Charminar. Now, that is usually the place where the police has been telling us is the place where these protests take place. And of course, are a little communally sensitive, these particular areas. And that is why they're making sure that more security deployment is done there, which is why, as I mentioned in the earlier conversation that we were having, that the marketplaces were being closed down. The Bandh had been called for by the protesters. And in fact, these several shopkeepers had been closing down their shops voluntarily as well to make sure that their businesses do not get affected because of these kind of violent protests. However, on the ground, we are being told that as of now, today police is on standby, the RF is on standby. Apart from a flag march that they will be carrying out, perhaps other than that, they will only be carrying out outreach programs. They will be speaking to these people who might come out in the night. In fact, they had come out yesterday night as well. So they will be having a conversation with them. They will be trying to counsel them to make them understand to not come out and make these violent protests also. In these
Priyanka, stay with us. We have BJP leader Krishna Sagar Rao joining us on the phone line. Krishna Sagar, what is your first reaction about this now that we're seeing massive protests in Hyderabad?
These protests are not organic. These are orchestrated protests and sponsored by MIM and TR to create disharmony in the community. Bharatiya Janata Party condemns this kind of a dangerous game which is being played out almost like a communal playbook in Hyderabad. And this can have dangerous consequences if not contained. But I don't foresee TRS taking any decision, TRS government taking any decision to curtail these kind of sloganeering, rioting and vandalism in Hyderabad.
Thank you, Krishna Sagar, for joining us with that reaction of yours. Priyanka, coming back to you about what we were discussing earlier, could you take us further through that?
Well, let's also tell our viewers about the kind of legal recourse that had been approached, and of course, because of which T. Raja Singh, in fact, had been let go. And of course, now we're also seeing that because of as a precautionary measure, Raja Singh is also inside his house, and the police has also told him to not come out, to not make any public, any public rallies, to not address any rallies, do not speak any more about the issue that has already taken place with respect to his comments, with respect to the video that he had made, this 10-minute long video where he has categorically made fun of the Prophet, and that has of course hurt the sentiments of the Muslim community here, at least in Hyderabad as well, and they have been protesting against it. Now of course the police has told him to not come out because because we are seeing these kind of statements by the Congress party where they have said wherever you see Raja Singh you should beat him up. So of course, and if he does come out, the police has said that it might also create a more dire law and order situation, which is why he is been told to stay in his house. Apart from that, as far as the security measures are concerned, as I had been speaking, they had of course been carrying out flag marches yesterday, and as earlier as well, as I mentioned, that the outreach programs will also be carried out. But we do see that this issue is not really dying down as of now. The anger is very much palpable here, at least on the ground. The people, in fact, are not backing down, and they're saying that they do want some kind of a punishment. They do want some kind of an action by the authorities to be taken against Raja Singh, because they've also stated one more thing, is the fact that this is not a one-off incident that has taken place with respect to Raja Singh making these kind of communally insightful statements. They have said that Raja Singh has had several antecedents of these kind of incidents that have taken place earlier as well, where he has made anti-Muslim community statements, anti-Islam statements, and these are the kind of statements that have been made by the AIMIM leaders and also the Congress leaders. In fact, the AIMIM MLAs, in fact, have written to the speaker in the letter. They have mentioned this, that this is not just unbecoming of Raja Singh, but it is in contravention to his oath, and that this is not happening the first time, which is why they are demanding an expulsion of Raja Singh. and which is why in fact we are seeing, because of the kind of statements that he has made, the lot of anger that we see on the ground by these people of the particular community coming out on the streets and protesting, and they're saying that they will continue to do so till there is some kind of action, and the action that they're demanding is that Raja Singh to be hung till death.